Welcome to the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies, where there's always another secret.
Welcome back, Sixers, to the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies. This is episode 89, and today is July 26th, 2021. I'm Bill, and I'm joined, as always, by my premeditative co-hosts, Amy and Jordan. Welcome, guys.
Hello. Almost forgot to turn on my microphone. That would have been awesome.
Before we get started, we do want to remind you that the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies is not a spoiler-free podcast. That means if there is something in the Cosmere you haven't read and you're worried about hearing spoilers, you might want to go read those first, then come back and join the discussion.
The worries are well founded.
Tonight, we are talking about a concept that's shown up across the entire Cosmere, intent. What is its place in the Cosmere, and particularly in the magic systems that power it? For those of you who listen to the podcast recordings or watch the videos on YouTube, we do want to remind you that it's possible for listeners to interact with us live via chat as we record each episode at www.twitch.tv/InkeepersTable. We record episodes of the podcast every other Monday night, starting at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, so please join us and take an active part in the discussion. The show is made possible by the support of our listeners and patrons. It will, of course, continue to be free, but if you want to help us out, head on over to patreon.com/Cosmere Studies. Even pledging $1 or $2 per episode really helps us out as we work to keep the show going and improve it each time. Patrons get immediate access to our Discord channel, where you can talk about the show and the Cosmere with other listeners. It's a great community. We've got a lot of great discussions, a lot of great people, and you'll even get early access to bonus episodes, exclusive access to other bonus content, and other good stuff. Yeah? So, welcome. This is an interesting topic, I feel. Like, it's a little different than some of the stuff that we've done, because it's just a very broad theme across the series.
Yeah, we also haven't done one as a topic suggested by a reader or listener just yet, so it's weird for us in multiple ways.
Yeah, this topic was suggested by Alfonsina, one of our listeners and patrons, and we would love recommendations from y'all for what you want to hear us talk about. Yeah. So make sure to send those in.
Yeah, it's such a broad topic that it's sort of hard to figure out where to start. As I was doing my own research, I discovered, and I didn't realize this before now, that Brandon has started referring to the actual sort of motivation behind the shards as the capital I intent as well. And so now you sort of have this intent versus intention thing, because, of course, everything gets complicated in the Cosmere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the concept actually kind of reminds me of something I read. Have y'all ever read anything by David Eddings?
Yes. I read the first one.
Did you read the Belgariad?
Yeah, I read the first in the Belgariad. I don't know that I made it.
The magic system over there was called the Will and the Word, where basically you visualize what you want to happen and then you speak the word. And so saying the word by themselves without the will has no results, and that sort of seems to be how it works in the Cosmere as well.
Mm-hmm.
But Jordan, you've got a lot of notes on this, so you had particularly regarding the beginning, the generality of intent. So you want to sort of give us an idea of what we're talking about?
Yeah. So the general idea is sort of the idea of you have to mean it when you do it.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the best example of that is with Aeons, I think, in Elantris, where you can't accidentally make an Aeon. You have to be trying to do it, because otherwise, any time an Elantrian was just sitting here and giving someone directions, make a right turn, suddenly they've drawn half an Aeon, and then they have to stop, and then you have to be trying to do it. And
suddenly, instead of just pointing and drawing, there's also like these wavy hand motions, like just get it out of the way, just wipe it off like an eraser.
Yeah, if that were the case, an Italian would hate to be an Elantrian. It would definitely cause problems. Yeah, this is a dumb joke, but I'm proud of it regardless. Anyway, let's see, where did I lost my window? Things got moved around. Here we are. So the wording that I found on the copper mine is intent is more import than esoteric magic systems. Is more important. Oh, okay, that was a great typing on my part. Than the harder ones like
You're
allomancy.
Doing great.
Thank you. But even then, intention's important. Even in the harder magic systems like allomancy. Compounding, for example, takes practice. You have to sort of understand the concept of what you're doing before you do it. Look at Vin, for example.
Well, and even if it's not compounding, even just burning metals, because your body doesn't naturally metabolize them, but you think and you burn tin or you burn adium. That's not normally how metabolism works. You don't just think, okay, I am going to metabolize that sandwich okay, lift is a different case. I understand. But you can't just say, okay, I'm going to burn this sandwich to give me the energy I need to run a mile. That's not how it works. But with allomancy, you're like, okay, you're intentionally just doing something that you wouldn't naturally do, but because you're kind of willing it to happen, it comes about.
Yeah, and you look at something like Vin, for example. She early on she doesn't know what she's doing, but she sort of has this instinctual burning she's doing. It takes practice to instinctually burn the way she does, and she's been sort of instinctually burning her pewter to keep her going. And that's why she's survived, where a lot of other street urchins, especially as small as she is in that world, probably would have died. But it's one of these things that takes practice to sort of understand what it is you're doing. It's sort of a cool thing with Brandon's magic systems. Brandon's talked about before with character development that if you want to make a character likable, you move various sliders up or down. So, like, if someone's highly competent and highly charismatic and like everything, they become a Mary Sue or a Marty Stu or whatever the term of the day is.
Or whatever you want to call it,
they're just great at everything, and they're not an interesting character. They have nowhere to go. But you take someone, it's like, okay, I'm going to give them high intelligence but low charisma, and you have a Sherlock Holmes style character, and you can make it interesting interplaying with those things. Brandon sort of does that with his magic systems as well. The harder the magic system is, the more creative he can really get with how he finds a solution. But you take one of his softer ones, like Awakening, and you have to throw in a concept like intent to understand it, because you have squish room in there, and so you have to understand how does the intent going to affect the squishy concept to make it feel as good as the hard magic systems.
Right. Let's talk about Awakening a little bit, because I feel like this is one of the prime examples of how it works, because when you are awakening an object, you form the intent and then you speak the words, the commands.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of how it works and how skilled an awakener can be is how well they form the intent, because you can use the exact same commands between two awakeners, and it can be more effective for one than the other.
I mean, I also feel like there's a little bit of intention in what you use too, like and using a cloak and cutting things so like the cloak has things more like arms or a head or whatever else too. So that doesn't fit exactly with intent, but I feel like
that's more of a planning and fitting in with I feel like it ties in a little bit at least. I mean, there's much more mental to intent with awakening than physical.
To your point, actually, I actually do think it does affect it somewhat, because this is more akin to forgery, but forgery and awakening have a lot in common. But you are also trying to get the item's intent in awakening. the whole idea that the item wants to be alive. And so if you are sitting here cutting it up into a formed shape, you are making it fit closer to its intent of feeling alive.
You're creating a cognitive identity, like for the cognitive self that we've seen in, for example, Mistborn Secret History, where or we've seen in the I Am a Stick. What and you do is when you create it in a living form, it's closer to what you, and so the distance between point A and point B shrinks, and it's easier to tie together with the command and the intent.
The cognitive distance.
Yeah, I kind of was
in the Cosmere.
It is, yeah. I was also kind of thinking of like, along with just like cutting fabric with Awakening, there's also like making little stick people. In fact, that they're like a stick person versus just like a stick. It can move better and do more tasks that like a person could do compared to a stick that would do whatever.
Right,
be a stick.
Yeah, be a stick.
Yeah, it's closer to what you want it to be, and so it's easier for it to make that transition.
Yeah.
But and so I think that works on a cognitive level, but I think intent is almost sort of the part of me feels like what you're talking about is the cognitive aspect, and intent almost reaches into the spiritual aspect.
Yeah, it reaches into both in kind of an interesting way. I didn't put it in the show notes, but there was I didn't think that was going to go here. But Brandon talks about that, how the spiritual aspect is sort of the core intent identity, like the immutable aspect of it, and why the shards, for example, have this capital I intent behind them, because they're even though they exist on all three planes, they have this primary spiritual thing. But how people perceive something can change something's spiritual identity.
Yes.
And so it gets to this weird middle ground where the spiritual is this ideal, but the cognitive can affect the ideal.
Well, it's one of the reasons that Taravangian, becoming odium is a very interesting concept, because it's a completely different intent between, Taravangian and odium and race and odium. The way they see it is completely different. And so who knows what changes that's going to bring out in the future of the Stormlight Archive and the entire Cosmere as it goes.
Especially early on.
Yeah, there's also the Reyes is not the person he used to be. Like the shard has definitely affected him by then. So we don't know how to compare it to the beginning either. But
but we have seen who, we got a very brief description of who Reyes was before he picked up the shard.
Not a good man.
From Hoyt. He was just like, he was always a horrible, horrible person.
So yeah. Fun times.
Not exactly a ringing endorsement.
No.
Right.
We were talking about forgery for a second, because we talked about doing aeons. But yeah, like intent is a huge part with forgery, because you have to know what it is that you want it to be and where it came from. Because that seemed to be a big thing that I remember. Oh, now I'm forgetting her name. Shy. What Shy was doing is that she would know, oh, this rock came from this quarry and it went through all these different processes, and so she could make it do much more. She had a lot more finesse that way than it seems like other forgers did, because she would pay attention to all those little details, because it helped her shorten the cognitive distance, like we said, kind of in getting it from being this to being a desk or whatever she was trying to do.
Like, it was possible to make big changes, but they didn't last. They didn't stick. They, disappear after 20, 30 seconds, which is why she had to study the actual past. It's almost, in a way, it's almost the opposite of the way Awakening works. Because you take something and you try and make it like what you're trying to turn it into with soul stamping, with forgery. It's almost like you're trying to find out what it was so that you can find it an easier path.
Forgery and soul casting have a ton in common as far as how they work. And so, a lot of what Shy does is it's actually it's more of a negotiation, where she's sitting here looking through its past and trying to find an angle to convince it that what she wants is also what it wants at the same time. And so she wants this desk to be beautiful, but this desk has been mistreated and all this other stuff. And she's looking into its past and being like, well, no, but you could have been this, and this thing could have happened here. And had they just taken care of you, you would have been this. And the desk can see itself as, yes, I would be this beautiful thing, and I could be this beautiful thing.
So now I will be that beautiful thing.
Well, and to compare it to soul casting, we look at, I think the best example, Shallan, in her 2 first early attempts to soul cast, the difference between doing the, what was it, the Wind's Pleasure? What was the name of the ship?
I don't
The Wind's
remember.
Pleasure,
Well,
it's the Wind's Pleasure.
Yeah, versus the stick, which one is much more difficult in size, you'd think, but Shallan's able to successfully soul cast the ship because she reaches out to the ship and says, you know, come on, you got to save the crew. And it's like, no, I'm a ship. I can't do that. And it's like, you protect the crew. Like, they're dying. And they need you to do this. And so she convinces it that what Shallan wants is also what the ship ultimately wants to do.
Right.
And then, but the stick, she can't get a simple stick to do it, but she just did an entire boat. Because the stick's just like, yeah, I'm just a stick. No, but you
could be fire. And it's just like, yeah,
nah,
that's not doing it for me. Sorry.
No.
That's a no sell there. And so it's interesting how something that's much more massive is far easier because she got the intent right.
Indeed.
No, it's I find this very interesting also with Shy, going back to the forgery thing, where she's trying to understand very deeply what it is, something, in the case of the Emperor, what someone was on a very deep level, and really getting into their mind in comparison to the the Rememberers or whatever the royal forgers were. They would take a crap.
I've forgotten what they're called.
They'd put a crappy vase out and just be like, stamp, oh, it's beautiful, ta-da.
Oh yeah.
And because they're not interested in what it was at all. They're only interested in making it what they want it to be, and thus there's no creativity to them. Whereas with Shy, there's actual artistry. Like when what was it? There was like a mural that she painted, or not painted, but soul stamped into existence. And they're like, "What is this a copy of?" She's like, "It's not a copy of anything. This is just this painting could have happened." And so she's able to create because she understands it on such a deep level.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I love so much about that book is just how she looks at things and recognizes them. It's a very fascinating, just that she does see deeper into it and understand it on a complete, like you said, on a completely different level. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what was the other one? I had another note here. Okay, it was here. There's this word of Brandon talking about. Okay, come on. No, you can do this. Awesome. So this is going back to the practicing angle that matters, because Mughal was, who's the person asking him this question, was asking about compounding. It says compounding requires practice in the Heroes of Ages annotations. And so this is what Brandon said, talking, like sort of clarifying that point. He said, "What I think I was getting at in the annotations was a Cosmere magic rule that perhaps I hadn't completely refined yet," which back then, the only book that really would have dealt really hard into intent would have been Elantris, which was his first published book. So yeah, he hadn't quite grabbed that just yet. And intent isn't that important in the Aeon door system anyway. It's more about your knowledge and making these Aeons work together. So he says, this is the idea. Intention is vitally important to the workings of most Cosmere magics. You can learn to burn metals instinctively over time, but it does take time for your body to figure out what it's doing. If you have instruction and guidance, you can pick it up in an evening like Vin did. Same goes for most magics. This ties into Awakening with the idea you have to form a command. During Warbreaker, where I was really refining that aspect of the magic. Logically, since the beginning of the Cosmere, I wanted all 3 realms to be important to the way the magic worked. The practice, therefore, if for compounding, is mental practice, a barrier to overcome to understand what is happening and what it will do for you. If you already know all these things by having explained it to you, that barrier is far less high. I think that's what I was talking about in the annotations without really having the idea specified yet, though I'd have to look back at the annotation to say for certain. And so it's interesting there because we do see that idea because Vin has her luck. And that's her first, that's the first power she tries to use. She doesn't really know what it is she's doing. She's just sort of mollifying them. And that's all she sort of really uses it for. And so she thinks this is what this power does. It makes people calm down. She doesn't understand there's this whole breadth of emotion that she could manipulate if she wanted to.
Which comes out when she speaks to Breeze and she sees him, playing the
room.
Playing the entire room like an instrument.
Yeah. And it lets her understand. And think about what Breeze talks about, where he has this discussion with Hammond about manipulation. And Clubs even agrees with him. He talks about you can't trust yourself around soothers because they just have a way of manipulating you. And it's because I think part of it is that
which
intent.
is interesting coming from Clubs because he's a Copper Cloud and therefore, quote, immune to it.
But he has the full respect for the power because he understands it's more than just the power itself. And because I think there's also this unintended sort of like everyone can sort of manipulate each other because, especially in this universe, because there is sort of this connection that everyone has through the cognitive and spiritual realms.
It feels like, to put it into D&D terms, Dungeons and Dragons terms, intent would be based on your charisma stat, I almost feel like.
Probably a mix of charisma and wisdom, but yeah, I do think more
and
charisma.
Wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, charisma, not just how outgoing you are, but how well you understand it and how well you can channel it.
Yeah. Definitely charisma is a lot more important on the soul casting side. Because we see Shalon in awe of Yesna, who just sort of force of will tells air to become stone.
Yeah.
Or tells a guy to become smoke.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yesna's a scary woman.
Like a human, like a living human, he tells them to become smoke or crystal. And it's just sort of a...
Poof. You just do it.
Oh, I guess this is happening now. This is a thing.
This is clearly what I wanted, right?
I don't want it.
Okay, so let's go back to Scadrial. So Farukami is definitely intent based. At the end of Bands of Mourning, we see Wax playing with the coin that he was given. It was by Hoyd, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And
yeah.
Disguised as a beggar.
He's had this for a little while now. Not a long time, but he's had enough time to fiddle with it. And then suddenly he realizes, wait, this might be a metal mine. Why is there copper in here?
Well, he saw the sliver of Nicrosil around the edge of it, which reminded him of the discs.
Right.
Yeah.
And suddenly, because he knows it's there, he's able to access it. He wouldn't have been able, and he could have accessed it at any time before that, but he didn't know it was there. But it didn't just, he didn't put it in his hand and go, oh, I have memories now. He had to intentionally go in and pull those memories out.
Yeah, and this, which sounds very similar to what something Brandon has said about honor blades. Because people were asking, like, wait a minute, as soon as they picked up Town's honor blade, shouldn't they have known that, this is something different?
Was, yeah.
Shouldn't they have started to use his powers? And
but it's an intent thing.
Yeah, and he explains that. I have here we are.
As far as they knew, it was just another shard blade.
Yeah, here we go. Some readers have already figured this out, so I don't think I'm engaging in too large of a spoiler to dig on this one. There are several oddities going on here. The most important one relevant to the question is the blade in question. If you compare the descriptions of the sword described in the epilogue of the Way of Kings to the one that traveled with the madman, allegedly Talon and the Herald to the Shattered Plains, you'll find they're different. So there's one. It's not the same blade. But he then clarifies. Let's see. Further down, blah, blah, blah. Any more filler words? The other issue here is the somewhat lesser question as to whether the character is actually Talon, or some characters in World don't believe that, though his viewpoint from Words of Radiance strongly imply otherwise. This isn't specifically relevant to the conversation for reasons I'll talk about below, but it is tangentially related, because in the Cosmere, intent is important to many types of magic. It's theoretically possible to hold an honor blade and not realize what its powers are, and therefore be unable to access them. Which then makes me think back to those coins and makes me start thinking of the honor blades very similar to the ferrochemical coins that we have that have the ability to grant powers to people who don't have them. And we don't know what excisors are yet, whatever it is that makes these coins possible. And I'm starting to wonder if the honor blades are operating on some sort of similar principle to the actual ferrochemical discs, coins, whatever we call these things. Because they're granting powers to people who haven't taken up oaths. And I just wonder if that it's a similar principle.
Well, the taking of oaths was the second, not secondary, but it came second. You know, the honor blades came first. But no, it's an interesting. Brandon likes this concept of gifting abilities to other people. It shows up in the Reckoners as well. Yeah, where there are certain epics who are gifters and can transfer their powers to someone else.
Well, it's because there's so many limits that get placed on magic itself, and there's something interesting that happens once people don't have the limits. Like, so in Mistborn, you can, it's mostly genetic, between Allomancy and Feruchemy, minus a simple, beads of Lorasium, which feel like a little bit of an outlier.
Yeah.
And then,
well, it's a god metal, so those are different.
Yeah, and so, but otherwise, you have to be chosen. Elantris, you have to be chosen. What's interesting are the magic systems you don't have to be chosen. On Roshar, it's all oath-based. And so you have to say the words, and you have to mean the words. That's the real intent that happens behind most of those shards. I think it's Lopin, of all
Bentley
people, who
that.
explains that.
A lot of people complain that it seems like everybody's becoming a radiant but that's kind of the point of the Stormlight Archive, is you have these uber powered armies going up against each other, and
escalation.
The fact that you can seek it out, you see these what's the boy's name in Rhythm of War, who Kaladin puts his armor around, who wants to become a Radiant. He wants to bond to Spren.
I feel like it's Aaron, but it's not right. It's something.
It's
like that.
I'm blanking on it.
Aaron.
Aiden.
Aiden. Is it Aiden?
Aiden, I think.
Could be Aiden.
I think it's Aiden. But it's an active goal. We saw it happen with the Lopin. We saw him actively going out. He's like, okay, I want to do what Kaladin's doing. He becomes a squire and actively does. And so there are ways to access it, even if you are not bonded to a Spren. But so there are different ways to. It's not just a matter of being chosen. It's sort of a hybrid, I guess, on Roshar, because to progress further, you have to find a Spren and be chosen by that Spren. But the only limit is by whether a Spren will actively choose to bond you. So it's a smaller form of consciousness rather than being chosen by the universe or
genetics or whatever else,
or by one of the shards. It's by a smaller consciousness,
by a little shard. No,
smidgen.
So the only two magic systems that I can think of that seem to be purely, well, okay, I guess with breaths, anyone can do it if you have breath.
Yes.
And it's readily available, so it's not impossible to get. But the only ones that seem to be purely, you don't have to have anything. You just have to have the right intention behind it to make it work. Forgery doesn't seem like you have to be chosen to be a forger.
You just have to train and
You
learn
have
how to do
trade
it.
for it, yeah.
Yeah, you have to train for and be in the correct location, since everything is geography based. And
It hasn't been made clear if Chaishan works that way as well.
That's right. Is that the martial art? That's the martial art one.
Yeah, that's the
I
martial
thought that was
art
Jindo.
That's the name of the religion, I believe.
I said, okay.
Oh, goodness.
It's been a while. Gonna have to.
It's been a
double check.
while.
No,
It's been a minute.
Chaishan is the name of the magics, or the
the
art, the martial art, where they're
Okay.
doing forms in the air.
Yeah.
It was never made clear because Elantris, it was Brandon's first book,
Yeah.
and the Cosmere wasn't fully developed yet.
Really wasn't clear.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that one I don't see a direct, like you need to be born from a certain family or anything like that. It seems like it's mostly study based, and just sort of how well you know it. The other one and the terrifying one's hemalurgy.
Yeah.
You don't need to be from anything. You just have to have the right intention in order to
And
make
the right
it,
knowledge about to do it in just the right spot.
Yeah.
Well, and like even Harmony can't really stop you from using it.
No.
Yeah. If you do too much of it, he can start to influence you.
He can influence you if you have enough within you, but he can't stop it from happening.
True.
Like he can't just say, no, this doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now the limit is you have to intend to create a spike. Just killing someone with metal isn't enough. And so, which is why there's spikes galore at the end of Era 1, is because Ruin is guiding people, and so the intentionality is quite clearly there. But
Yeah, a lot of people wonder about the spike that Spook gets, but again, like you were saying, that the intent wasn't by the soldier that stabbed Spook. The intent was from Ruin himself,
Yeah.
who was influencing the soldier to stab Spook.
which asks some interesting questions about the idea of, because if you're how far can you be influenced and it's still your intent? Like if someone is, because like another example is giving up your breath. You have to mean it. You can't just say the words. No one
Right.
can force
Yeah.
you to do it. You have to be willing to give up that breath. Well, could you use emotional allomancy to put someone in the mood to give up their breath? And does that still count? And it's because it's all these squishy topics.
Well, it's like the
Yeah.
claim a lot of people say regarding hypnotism, where it's like you can't make somebody do something they didn't already want to do. I know nothing about hypnotism, so I'm really not. I can't delve into it. It's just a claim I've heard, and it's kind of I think it works in emotional allomancy the same way.
Yeah, and it is definitely an unclear area, but it's clear because we've seen it happen that you can be influenced somewhat and the intent still counts. At least with when it comes to hemalurgy. Now the issue is getting that spike in the correct spot when you stick it in. You're not really going to get that accidentally correct. Those are kind of specific things. But you don't have to understand what you're doing as hemalurgy. The proof of that is the fact that there's an entire religion on Scadrial that involves spiking yourself so that you can pray to Harmony and receive some influence back. And they don't understand what it is they're doing. They don't understand it's hemalurgy because Harmony has tried to hide as much of that as he can.
But that's because the spikes have already been created.
Yeah. And so they still have that hemalurgic charge.
And I also think it's slightly different for Wax in particular, because his spike was given to him. Was it by Marsh, or was it like it was?
No, it wasn't by Marsh.
Or no, it was by one of the. It was a Kandra, I believe, who gave it to him.
I think that was correct.
Yeah.
No,
somebody who served Harmony.
someone did a thing.
in a place with stuff.
There's a chance, again, we might need to reread some stuff.
Maybe.
No, the other thing that I just think is so interesting about this concept is the fact that it actually perfectly explains a lot of things that happen in the Cosmere without muddying the waters too much. You'd think something as squishy as intent would actually make it more muddy, but it actually clears some things up as to why some things happen but others don't. Because if you can just accidentally do stuff, suddenly there's all sorts of problems out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, this is to bring into a different book series. Oh my goodness, The Name of the Wind. We see Sympathy, which is a very Brandon approved style magic system.
A very hard magic system.
Yeah, it's very, very hard. I love it. But we see early on that you can do some things you don't intend to do if you do the incorrect bindings. In Brandon's universe, for the most part, that doesn't tend to happen. You don't have a lot of unintended consequences of magic as far as people's intent goes. Where they tend to go wrong is actually their knowledge of what it is they're doing. With a certain sword being the number one example of you don't quite fully understand the powers you're messing with here.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know, it's a remarkably simple solution to an elegant problem, I think, as far as creating a universe goes.
Well, and just having a magic system that somebody can't just stumble onto. Mm-hmm. You know, like, because you have to mean it. It also really works. You know, we've seen it show up in the Stormlight Archive with the oaths and the progressive oaths. Each of them gets a little bit more difficult, and you can know the words, but they won't necessarily be accepted.
Seth knows literally every single word for him to go all the way to the fifth ideal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, Nail just laid them out for him. But you have to mean them. You have to be prepared for them. You have to be willing to act upon them. That's why, Kaladin knows the words in Oathbringer. He tries to, because Syl's saying, the words, say them, and he can't say them because he wouldn't mean them yet. And that's one of the best parts of Rhythm of War is when he finally accepts. The oath is, I accept that there are those who I will not be able to save.
Which you can't really mean it
words at any time, but he didn't actually accept it yet.
Mm-hmm. You have to mean it.
It's a very difficult thing to mean it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it actually, the other thing that's really cool about that is how much that echoes real life.
Mm-hmm.
We know what we're supposed to do to improve our lives, right? Most of us know that, sitting around and chomping on potato chips all day probably isn't going to help us get towards our goals. We know that we probably should read more, that we should go to bed earlier. We know that we should basically just never watch reality TV in any form because it's just going to rot your brain. But we do it anyway. Because, kind of like it. It's fun.
We say we're not going to do it, but we don't mean it. And so it doesn't have any effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have these conversations with my children all the time about, and then they're like, oh, I know. And it's like, well, you keep doing it, so obviously you don't really know that you're not supposed to do that, or you are supposed to do this, and I mean, mm-hmm. I'm guilty of it too. Like, today was the first day in, like, a long time that I actually exercised in the morning. Like, I've been meaning to for months.
And I'm proud of you.
Yeah, thank you. Adults need to work on it too. It's not just kids.
Or we could claim it's just kids and feel better about ourselves.
No.
Oh, okay.
Now, speaking of Roshar, one of the coolest examples of how intent is important shows up in Rhythm of War when Navani is trying to create anti-investiture. because, talking about how a sound is the exact same if it's as its inverted form. But just by sort of doing a mental shift, she changes its identity. She's able to flip it.
Yeah, she flips a switch.
Mm-hmm. And Fluffy is everywhere.
Good. The Quantum Conundrum, if anyone in chat has played it, we need you to leave a review and say that you came for the Quantum Conundrum references. It's an obscure game, but it still checks out.
But yeah, but it's purely intent, because it's the exact same sound. And having studied acoustics in college, that was one of the coolest things I remember learning is because they actually demonstrated it. They played a sound and they played its exact inverse, and it just disappeared entirely. They canceled each other out, and it became silent. It was really,
trippy.
really cool.
Physics is awesome. Brought to you by physics.
But the way that Brandon worked that into the magic system, I think, is really cool, because it makes sense in this context.
Yeah.
She's humming a certain note, and she's like, now I'm humming the inverse of that note, which is the exact same, but not.
Yeah.
Well, and another example on Roshar with that, going with your rhythms example, are the singers. Whenever they go out into the storm to gain a new form, they have to form the right intent to attract the spren that they want to capture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very similar to Awakening in that regard, in that you have to sort of have the right mindset for it to really take. And they're trying to discover what is the correct intent to make this work when they're trying to discover these new forms.
Yeah. No, I also like... You've got a note in here, Jordan, that I really like. I hadn't thought about it in this context, but how for Shallan, when she summoned her shard blade, it took her 10 heartbeats early in the beginning, because she thought it was supposed to. And then when she realizes she doesn't have to, suddenly pattern becomes her pattern blade immediately. Of course, then there's all the complications with her old
how is it?
shard blade and
Rhythm of War. You're so good at explaining one thing and then confusing it entirely for the rest of us.
So yeah, we thought we had it. No.
And then with the opposite, how Maya
Adon
takes,
and Maya.
Suddenly starts taking less than 10 heartbeats to arrive for Adolin, and it's just like, okay, something's happening here.
So what does this mean? Yeah.
Yeah, and it starts... Correct me if I'm wrong, the first time that happens, it's after he knows about the Radiance, right?
I believe so, yeah.
The first time it starts is in Oathbringer.
Yeah, I thought so. I couldn't quite remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so he knows it doesn't have to, be 10. And so he knows that he has a little bit of wiggle room. There's some negotiation he can do. Where he's like, come on.
He also knows it's 10 for a dead shard blade.
Yeah.
But it's after he's actually interacted with Maya within Shadesmar that happens.
Yeah.
And so it's
that's right, because he says, come on, Maya.
And she shows up in like 7 or 8 heartbeats, and it's just like, okay, we're getting somewhere here, all right, But it's because knowledge and intent change the magic systems, and I love that it works that way.
So knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm. Well, and speaking
more than half
of
the battle.
Speaking of change, talking about the general Cosmere, Dawn shards. There are 4 Dawn shards, and they are each a powerful intent. We've only had one that's officially confirmed. We've had so much speculation on the others, but change is the one that we've actually seen within Dawn Shard. Mm-hmm. And then each of the shards is also kind of an intent. Each of the 16 shards, whether it's whimsy or ruin or preservation or dominion or devotion or whatever. Those are essentially intents.
And it's just trying to, for us as readers, it's trying to find out what that intent actually means.
Well, for the vessels even, trying to figure out what that intent means.
Well, it's because you could sit there and be like, ruin, okay, so it wants to destroy things, and not understand, no, it's the physical embodiment of entropy, it's an agent of change. But very similar to odium, where odium's like, I am passion. And all this, and we now know for certain, since we now have it from Taravangian's perspective, that it is these things, but oh man, is it hatred. And I think I'm willing to bet ruin is probably a similar thing, that it is the agent of change. It is this, but it's ruin.
Well, the other thing is, I find it interesting, odium is, its hatred, particularly in the hands of race.
Yeah.
But I feel like in the hands of a different vessel, it could be passion.
Yeah, Brandon's talked. There was a word. There was a word of
race
Brandon
claims
about
that it's passion, but race was also a very,
Angry
devious
person.
and hateful person.
Yeah.
Yeah. The someone asked. I'd have to go find it, but someone asked Brandon basically like, could someone switch what you would call a shard, if they had the right mindset to it, and to which he basically said, probably not, but you can nudge it a little bit. Well,
that's like, there's so much speculation about harmony and discord, and people talking about how some people think harmony is going to become discord. I'm not convinced of that just yet, but it's just sort of he had the potential to be discord.
I definitely think for picking up combinations of shards, it's probably a lot more important than when you pick up a single shard. Because
but now he is a single shard. Yeah.
But he could. There was another. I did a lot of words of Brandon for this. There's also basically someone asked that, could if you somehow killed Sazed, would he drop the harmony shard? Would he drop the ruin and preservation shards? And basically Brandon said it would depend upon what it is people are doing. But he most likely would drop the harmony shard, but people could manipulate it to split them back up again.
Like, it's since the shard has been become a shard instead of just being ad nauseam, that it's easier to tear it apart again, probably.
Something like that. Well, and then on top of it, it's not like we have a ton of experience with killing gods. We have seen a grand total of 3 gods killed on screen, but unfortunately 2 of them were negating each other, so it doesn't really count for our purposes. And so really we've only seen it one time, and it involved, again, a certain sword that is...
changes all the rules.
That breaks every rule.
And warps everything, and you're just like, all right, so what does this mean? And it's just like,
I don't know.
It could mean a lot of things, couldn't it?
We don't know.
And that's when Brandon just says Raffo, and we all die a little inside.
Yes, but then he comes out with the next book, and we get a little bit. Just a little tidbit.
The nibbles.
And it's always
okay, this is slightly off topic, but the Springineers put forward a theory in chat that I'm really, really liking. He said, I think something's going to happen with Adolin and Maya again next book. Oathbringer, Adolin says the first line of the first ideal to Maya. Rhythm of War, he speaks the second line to her. He hasn't finished the first ideal with her unintentionally yet, and I want to see if that's significant. That is an interesting theory, because I hadn't noticed that he said the second one in Rhythm of War. So
when does he summon Beetlejuice?
When he says the third part of the first ideal. Maya juice. No, that's not.
No.
Do you have any regrets, Bill, right now?
Partially. Yes, I have a few regrets. But, oh well, that's life.
It is.
But yeah, no, I like the way he's woven this into his magic system. It's really a cool way of going.
It's fun that that he's built his universe so well that you can sit there and go, oh, well, this part that I learned in this book affects that book and that book. And you can get so many other inferences from different worlds and different books compared to, I'm sure there are book series out there that do not have that kind of consistency in the lore. And I can't think of them right now, but I'm sure they exist. And I'm not saying the authors were doing a bad job, just that they didn't have the forethought or other things like that, and not that there aren't some
if I
gaps
see
occasionally in the
far, it's
Cosmere.
only because I stand on the shoulder of giants.
Yes.
Right.
And Brandon is definitely a student of his own genre and has taken great advantage of the fact that he has this grand history behind him.
Mm-hmm. No, I'd love to hear any theories on this, expanding on this from any of our listeners. So please, email those in to us at cosmerestudies@gmail.com. I'd love to hear what y'all think about this.
Man, you just slid that right in. That was smooth.
That's
Nice.
right. We do love hearing from our listeners, so keep on sending in your questions. Ask us about the Cosmere, drop ideas for topics that you want us to talk about, expand on what we've discussed. Because honestly, we study these things, yes, but y'all have insights that we've never thought of. And I want to hear those so that we can just, have our minds explode together.
Collaboration is fun.
Yeah, it's really cool. You can send questions and suggestions in a brief, concise email, like I said, to cosmerestudies@gmail.com. And we could hopefully read that as part of the show. The more concise it is, the more likely we are to read your email as part of the show, just because otherwise it gets long and convoluted and hard for us to discuss. But, we do want to hear from you. And if you want to send us a physical letter, we have a P.O. Box at the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies, P.O. Box 970063, Orem, Utah 84097. Amy, what are you up to outside of the podcast?
So I just finished doing some random fixing of my daughter's Noibat again. And my Facebook is Coincidence Cosplay and Props. My Twitter is @CoincidenceCosp. My Instagram is @coincidence_cosplay. My TikTok is Coincidence Cosplay. There's a trend, you might guess. And my website, my Etsy shop is etsy.com/shop/coincidence cosplay. And my husband's website is deckplan.io if you're into Magic the Gathering and want to build a deck that way. It's still very much in progress, but if there are problems or if something's broken, then you can tell me and I can tell him.
So exactly how does Deckplan work? Like, what do you know?
So I know they have the functionality right now that you can like take pictures of cards,
Okay.
and it will put them into your
Library?
library, and then you can build decks that way. And you can say, oh, well, I have these cards and I want to build a good deck. And then I think they have plans for people to be able to say, here's my deck. And people go, oh, that's a really good idea. And they can build a similar one and things like that. And there's lots more than that, but I am not great at Magic the Gathering, so I don't always know exactly what they're doing. But as for my projects that I am doing, I am going to be just working on my 3 costumes. I'm most of the way done with my jumpsuit for my variant Loki for FanX, and I'm going to be doing a D&D rogue and a Twi'lek. Apparently there's not a canon way to say it because they say it all different ways. Yeah, people have noticed that, like, even I think it's in Clone Wars, the show, like Obi-Wan in like the same conversation says Twi'lek and Twi'lek. So who knows how it's said? If someone knows, please tell me.
Twi'lekian.
That sounds
You've also
right.
heard, like, in The Mandalorian, there's like a character who says you crazy twi. So I mean, you just, who knows? Anyway.
Yeah, but that
so
person was from
I'm doing
Space
that.
Boston, so I don't know if that counts.
Anyway, so those are the 3 things that I'm mostly working on is doing those, and yeah. So if you want to see random updates about that, check out my stuff.
Jordan,
So,
anything
yes.
exciting going on?
Not as exciting as Space Boston is a concept. But yes, in
Well,
fact,
Jordan, if you want to go to Space Boston, you have to make a Twilight costume.
okay, let's put a list
wanna
of
be as
things
cool as
that
Amy.
no one wants to see. Let's start with my stream's actually been changing a lot of variety recently. The Mondays we've been playing a lot of Minecraft. If you're into that, I am building an evil lair, Twitch, everyone's like, "Oh, Jordan, Evil Lair, of course." Like, hey, shut up! I made the Hall of Justice last time I did something, so it's time to go the other way. It's about balance, harmony, if you will. It right now has a giant glass logo of my logo on it, and I'm quite proud of it. I'll post it in somewhere in our Discord. Maybe just a general video games room, right? Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'll go post that in there for people who are in our Discord. A plug for the Discord. Second, Tuesdays. I've started a thing called Tower Tuesday. We have people who have trained Amiibo who are just buff and roided up, and people try and climb as high as they go. If you're into Super Smash Brothers, I would really like you to show up on Tuesdays. Try Tower Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, because this has been a long-running project. At this point, I think I've had 27 different trainers who have helped me with this project, so it's quite thorough. So if you're into Smash Brothers, come on Tuesdays, give it a try.
Cool. As for myself, I have another podcast with my friend Dylan. We talk about board games. It's called The Innkeeper's Table, and that's where the Twitch channel name comes from, just in case anybody's curious. And we have new episodes coming out on Friday mornings. Because we're recording this out of order, I'm not sure which episode is going to be most recent and which episodes are coming up. We've got some good ones coming up, though. We've got some suggestions for if you enjoy Jenga, what games should you play, and a bunch of other stuff coming
That's
up.
not what I would have considered.
Keep an eye on that. We announced it last time, but just a reminder, we are now part of the Dice Tower Network, which is awesome because it's a great group. There's a lot of cross promotion. There's a lot of encouragement, help, and just work between the podcasts that way. And so that's just something we're really excited about now. I do have board game reviews over at www.innkeeperstable.com as well. And I occasionally post about games on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Innkeeper's Table, or there's also at Innkeeper's Table Podcast. We have both of those, and we post about stuff over there. For those of you who want to support the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies, but you cannot become patrons, we'd love it if you just tell people about the show. Let people who are fans of the Cosmere know about the show. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, to like and subscribe over on youtube.com/Cosmere Studies. And hey, we would love it if you toss us a good review wherever you listen to us. Also, commenting on the videos over on YouTube is great. It gets some good engagement, and we love that.
Especially if you played Quantum Conundrum.
Intent?
We need that review.
Yes. Quantum Conundrum is a great game with the voice of, and I'm blanking on his name, Q from
John
Star Trek.
Delancey.
John Delancey, that's his name. Great game. Random plug, they're not giving us any money. I don't even know who makes it.
Not yet.
Final thoughts about Intent.
It changes things. It can change things a lot. So what you mean matters. So yeah.
Yeah. It's a
I love
really cool concept that
Brandon
shows up elsewhere.
thinks these things through. Because I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, I like the way he's woven it into his magic systems. I've seen it in other areas, like I mentioned, the Will and the Word in the Belgariad and the Malorian. But he's made, it's a concept that I really like and feels very natural. And so I like that he's sort of codifying that within his magic systems. Mm-hmm. Special thanks to our patron producer, Mim's Laundry Service, making your dirty little secrets less dirty and more secret. In addition to the live episodes of the show that stream on twitch.tv/InnkeepersTable every 2 weeks, on Monday nights at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, listeners can find our videos on YouTube or audio versions of the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and just about any other service that carries podcasts by searching for Cosmere Studies. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under the profile at Cosmere Studies. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions for the show, email them to cosmerestudies@gmail.com. If you haven't heard, there is a new Reckoners novel that's just been released as an Audible original that's called Lux. Because of this, for our next episode, we're going to be discussing another non-Cosmere novel by Brandon, Steelheart, the first book in the Reckoners series. So join us for the live recording on August 16th, 2021, back on our normal recording schedule at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time, 10:30 p.m. Eastern at www.twitch.tv/InnkeepersTable. Until then, on behalf of Amy, Jordan, and myself, thanks for listening, and remember, there's always
always
another
another
secret.
secret.